Well, I think it's important to understand he doesn't have a philosophy, so he's not charting some course that he's laid out before.
We seem to be at the centre of a perfect storm. Britain's economy continuing to tank according to the IMF. In the US, the markets still haven't recovered from Trump's tariffs. And who is caught in the middle of all this? Our own Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, blowing in the wind.
Can someone make sense of it all? We'll be speaking to Trump's former close mate and advisor, John Bolton.
Kamal, before we get to John Bolton and the madness that is America right now and Donald Trump, let's just have a word about our own Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, because she's gone out to the US hoping to have this kind of triumphant, let's sign a trade deal and let's make sure that our own economic woes pale into insignificance in comparison to the stock market right now. But it's not proving to be Disneyland for her, is it?
No, it isn't. The International Monetary Fund, it has 2 meetings every year, and this is the spring meeting. And it's a place where finance ministers, Rachel Reeves, obviously she's called the Chancellor here, but finance ministers in most countries, they meet with central bank governors. And it's usually a time when, yes, as you say, they talk about growth prospects. But one of the major things they do is the IMF brings out a report on each country's trajectory in economics. And for the UK, it's been very bad. The IMF has downgraded UK growth. That means that the economy will be producing less tax for the government because we grow slower. That means that the fiscal rules are more at risk. That means that Rachel Reeves may need to raise taxes in the future. And we had figures this morning which said that the UK was borrowing far more than expected.
Yeah, 14 billion more. In fact.
Yes, because of the higher pay deals that Rachel Reeves agreed with the public sector unions, for example, the uprating of benefits and pensions, which are automatic because we've had higher inflation, so those upratings are more costly. The cost of running the government is increasing month by month, and every time that number increases, the borrowing costs for servicing, the cost for servicing that debt increase, and that makes Rachel Reeves' job even harder. And as you say, Camilla, and we've talked about this a few times, we have been discussing a free trade deal with America for 10 years, since the start of the first Trump presidency in 2016. We're still talking about it now. It is always imminent, but imminent is not a deal. And so she is meeting Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, while she's in Washington. There's so much going on, and at this stage, it just seems impossible to imagine that in all this noise, we are going to get to a position where there is going to be some kind of better news for the UK coming out of the IMF, where we have been downgraded, not because of what America is doing, but because of what we did in the budget.
That's the crucial point, isn't it? Because we have this rhetoric from Reeves along the lines of the world has changed. She's a Brownite, and it does remind me of Gordon Brown saying, you know, the global financial crash and blaming that for everything, even his own domestic policies. But look at this from the IMF's chief economist, Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas. He says domestic factors were the main driver behind Britain's downgrade, signalling that the Chancellor's £40 billion tax raid had damaged growth. So it might be convenient for her to have Trump upsetting the markets, but the point is she can't escape the fact that Labour's own economic policies have made life very, very difficult for the Chancellor.
Absolutely. You're in a situation which is quite chaotic, and people are struggling to understand day by day what Donald Trump might do next. What do you need in that situation? You need a confident Chancellor who, in their own country, is doing things that mean the economy is growing. And because Rachel Reeves has this big problem, not only did we see this morning the huge amount of borrowing that this government is doing, but also that private sector activity is contracting for the fastest rate in 2 years. We spoke about, Camilla, it's been one of our most popular podcasts of the last month, Awful April. She got slightly better growth figures last month, and everyone thought, is she out of the woods? That could be quite good. But actually, April is the time when all the new taxes start biting, and because the private sector is not only unclear about what America might do next, but is also unclear about does this government here in the UK really believe in growth, one of the things at this breakfast this morning, a lot of business leaders were there, a lot of bankers and economists. They all said, we're all waiting. We've all stopped. And the reason that activity has ground to a halt was firstly the budget last year and the rise in costs on business. And then second, Trump and on-off tariffs and this trade war, which is very, very unclear where it's going to be going. And Trump went hard on, I could sack the chair of the Federal Reserve, and then suddenly backtracked in the Oval Office yesterday and seemed to suggest that no, he'd never thought about terminating the central bank governor's post because he was warned that would layer even more chaos into the markets, would be disastrous for America's borrowing costs.
We have a lot of this, don't we? Trump backtracking. Oh, yes, I do think President Zelensky's a dictator. Oh, no, did I ever say that? You know, yes, I do think the tariffs should be applied universally. Oh, no, we're going to have a 90-day pause. That thing about Trump's tariffs, what did you say?
Yes, he said that the tariffs were permanent, but he was open to negotiation.
Yes, so are they permanent or are they flexible? You can't get an answer. Look, we're going to run through all of this with Ambassador John Bolton. He worked with Donald Trump in his first presidency. Indeed, he had a very significant role in the White House because he was the 26th United States National Security Advisor from 2018 to 2019. And he joins us now.
Well, this is a reflection that Trump meant what he said during the campaign when he called tariff the most beautiful word in the dictionary. A lot of people thought it was just an opening way to bargain, but he believes in tariffs, although for conflicting reasons. And I think what you're seeing as part of the confusion is the conflicting objectives clashing with one another. One theory is if you have a high tariff wall, it will encourage investment by domestic and other businesses in products that are tariffed that would otherwise not be profitable. But to make that work, you have to have high tariffs sustained over a long period of time. That clashes with the views of the markets, as we've seen over the past couple of weeks, which leads others in the administration to say, let's bargain the rates down. Well, you can bargain the rates down and that calms the markets, but it doesn't provide the trade wall that you need for the investment. So all these different conflicting, inconsistent goals that Trump has are reflected in the incoherence of the tariff policy, which I don't think is likely to subside. Whatever the markets do on any given day, it isn't necessarily a prediction for the future.
But do you think, Ambassador Bolton, that he put the pause on because he could see the markets in complete turmoil? And while he talks a good game on these things, we've had the same reaction, a bit of a climb down on this getting rid of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, that he's just blowing in the wind. Can you just give us an analysis of how he approaches these matters? Does he see graphs falling and then change his mind?
Well, I think it's important to understand he doesn't have a philosophy. So he's not charting some course that he's laid out before. One observer said, Trump doesn't have ideas, he has reactions. And I think what you're seeing is that kind of reactive behavior. He is transactional. He doesn't follow lines of policy. So he has an impulse in the morning to do high tariffs. Markets don't like it. So his reaction in the afternoon is to postpone the tariffs. I think anybody who thinks we're really going to have this resolved at the end of the 90-day pause doesn't appreciate how complex tariff negotiations can be. And there may be agreements that he can announce with great ceremony. I have an agreement with the United Kingdom on tariffs that might be a 3-page memorandum of understanding with the details to be worked out later. But for the average firm, and even for many large firms, it's the details that matter. So I don't see an end to this uncertainty and volatility, despite the best propaganda efforts of the Secretary of the Treasury to say the trade war between China and the United States is unsustainable and it will be de-escalated. Well, that's very nice. Who's going to de-escalate first?
The markets, whether they're stocks and shares or whether they're the bond and debt markets, can react in certain ways. But another thing, of course, that Donald Trump does watch carefully are the polls and what do voters actually think in America. And I'm just wondering, Ambassador Bolton, has there been any mood music that you can discern amongst the public that they are turning against Donald Trump. There are some polls that show approval ratings are dipping, although the MAGA support is remaining at incredibly high levels, 80%. But those polls also reveal that nobody has any time for the Democrats, who are in a complete mess. So at this stage, you need a horse to beat a horse. The Democrats don't have a horse, so can Trump just sail on even if the polls do dip?
Well, I think many people have observed about Trump in his first term, he has a high floor and a low ceiling, meaning that his support has been firm and really doesn't go down to 20 or 30%. It goes down to 40% and then stops. He's heading toward 40% again, but still slowly. I think that's understandable. We're still within the first 100 days. People just voted for Trump in November. They're hoping, acknowledging hope is not a strategy, but they're hoping that his promises come through, and they're going to wait for evidence that's more conclusive than gyrations in the stock market. I think that if the views that many people are increasingly sharing, that we're coming up on a recession in 3 months or 6 months, sometime before the end of 2025, that's when the real impact in the polls will be felt. And that's when nervousness in the Republican Party will rise to extraordinarily high levels, because while Trump isn't running for anything again, members of the House and a third of the Senate have to run for re-election next year. And if the economy goes south, Republicans will get the hit for it, and they know it.
He might be playing well with his MAGA fan base on Ukraine and Russia. It's not going down particularly well with the Western world, Ambassador Bolton. This idea that any peace deal would see Crimea formally recognised as a part of Russia, along with other, what the Ukrainians would regard to be stolen territory, no clear US security guarantee in return for that. And then we have Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio threatening to walk away from the talks if a deal isn't agreed soon.
Right. Well, Trump himself has threatened to walk away, and I think Rubio's cancellation of his trip to London is some indication of exactly where they are on it. They are about to shut down. I think there's another aspect, though, is that Rubio didn't want to go and talk to foreign ministers when Steve Witkoff, who sometimes looks like the real Secretary of State these days, is going to Moscow Thursday or Friday to talk directly to Putin. The fact is, Trump has essentially switched sides in this fight. He's already made concessions to Moscow that have met most of Russia's basic demands of any ceasefire agreement, or indeed even a long-term settlement. So I think the real question is Europe prepared to pick up the supply of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine that would be lost if Trump goes the next logical step from his perspective, and that's cutting off military assistance to Ukraine? I think that's pretty close to where he is.
Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, is in the headlines both in America and around the world, and certainly here in the UK. It seems that after the signal fiasco around the Houthi attack, also that Pete Hegseth was using Signal to talk about defense matters, even with his own family. I remember you predicting, Ambassador Bolton, that Elon Musk wouldn't last very long inside Trump's tent, and he's been making it increasingly clear that he is moving away from being a central character in the president's circle. Do you think Peter Hegseth is the next possibly to be eased out of the White House, or does Trump need to keep backing his defense secretary?
I think Hegseth, like others, like Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, are safe in the near term because Trump doesn't want to be seen as bending to political pressure from the media or the Democrats. But I think Hegseth in particular, his days are numbered. Trump invested a lot of political capital to get him confirmed. Now he's investing more political capital to save Hegseth from his own bad judgment, which he's demonstrated repeatedly. That's not how it's supposed to work in Trump's universe. Hegseth should be out defending him, not Trump defending Hegseth. So a lot of people speculate that during the long congressional recess in August, that's a time to deal with a lot of bad news. So, maybe August would be a time for Hegseth to get his resume ready for his next job.
On Iran, Ambassador Bolton, we know that Trump was highly critical of the deal that was struck by previous Democrat administrations. What's changed? Is it possible for the US to deal with Tehran over nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't think there's any deal that should be acceptable to the United States that I can imagine, but Trump believes he's capable of making a deal with anyone about anything at any time. And I think he has been talked into the idea that perhaps there is a deal with the Ayatollahs. This fellow, Steve Witkoff, the shadow Secretary of State, who knows nothing about Iran, nothing about nuclear weapons, nothing about arms control and proliferation, has had two meetings, direct and indirect, with the Iranians, has another one after his meeting with Putin. He goes to Oman, I think, and has a third meeting with the Iranians. We'll see what comes out of it. I think this is the Iranians trying to buy time. They're in desperate straits. They could use relief from sanctions. They could use relief from Israel's pounding. They're desperately worried Israel's about to attack their nuclear weapons program. And it might be that Trump is in effect giving them an ultimatum that they either come forward and start dismantling their nuclear program, or he'll allow Israel to go ahead and attack. It's hard to tell from the outside, but I am worried Trump is being led down another primrose path here by Witkoff for a deal that's essentially not worth the paper it's printed on.
We spoke, Ambassador Bolton, before the election, and I remember you telling us that Trump does not have a political philosophy, and this is going to be chaos ahead if he wins. And obviously he did then win. He promised the world that there would be peace in Ukraine in 24 hours, that there would be peace in the Middle East, particularly Israel, Hamas. Although he did, of course, warn about tariffs, no one imagined the method of how he would impose tariffs on the world and then, as you say, Camilla, bounce around with different numbers day by day. Is this, Ambassador Bolton, exactly as you thought it would be, or is Trump using chaos in a way to create change that actually has something within it which has a coherence? Or do you just think that we just have to live day by day with this president for 4 years?
Well, he lives day by day. We were told in the first term that in the Trump organization, he would come to work every day. He would insist no schedule be prepared. He'd walk in the office and say, let's see what happens today, which may be a way for success in the Manhattan real estate market, but it's not a way to run the U.S. government. I think a lot of the behavior you've seen in the first 3 months of the second term is he's now doing in public what he used to do behind the scenes in the first term, when it may have looked more organized. But as I said in my book, working in that White House was like living inside a pinball machine. And I think that is the way it will be for the remaining 45 months.
Can I ask you a final question, Ambassador Bolton, just on Islamic extremism? I had a very interesting conversation with a contact who's actually based in Rome, a moderate Muslim who was warning from Afghanistan, who was warning about the dangers of another 9/11 style attack following the fall of Kabul, and just with the general state of, well, insecurity in the Middle East. What's your view on the danger posed to the Western world by Islamic extremism in 2025? Obviously now a significant time on since 9/11.
Well, I think the threat is very real. I mean, this was one reason that I and many other people strongly urged Trump not to make a deal with the Taliban, and then urged Biden not to go through with the deal. The deal itself was a disaster. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan made it worse. But the principal reason was not to withdraw was that although Afghanistan was far from stable and prosperous, at least we had prevented the reemergence of a terrorist threat there, such as we saw on 9/11. But the withdrawal of all American and other NATO forces has led to a situation where foreign terrorist fighters like ISIS-K and others have gone back into Afghanistan. ISIS-K has launched attacks already against Iran at the time of the Soleimani observance in January of last year, at the Crocus Mall in Moscow shortly thereafter. Now, that's not an attack in Western Europe or the U.S. yet, but they've got a capability now that even the Biden administration acknowledged to deliver terrorist attacks from planning and groups based in Afghanistan. And Iran, which is the first state designated as a state sponsor of terrorism by Ronald Reagan back in his administration, has been carrying out death threats against Iranian dissidents and present and former U.S. government officials for the last several years. So the threat's real. Nobody can blink it away.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea.
Well, thanks for having me.
Look, on one hand, we know Ambassador Bolton has an axe to grind. It started well with Trump and then ended very, very badly. But this guy was a former US National Security Advisor. Okay, he knows his onions. He's making it very clear there. He doesn't have much time for Hegseth or indeed Wickoff. And I don't think many people in positions of authority in America have that much time for either of them. This is worrying, isn't it? If you look at the carve-up that the US is happy with when it comes to Ukraine, giving back Crimea to Russia, along with a load of other territory, with no security guarantee, I mean, is this... I'm sorry, if it looks like Putin appeasement and smells like Putin appeasement, it probably is Putin appeasement, Kamal.
But people who listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest, will have known this. And Camilla, to be frank and fair to the two of us, we have been saying this throughout, that the deal that Trump seemed to want was not just Crimea, but 20% of all Ukrainian territory should be ceded to Russia. But the fact is, there's a very large chance that Ukraine, well, A, won't agree to that deal and will continue fighting. And the question will be, if Trump then, so-called, open quotes, walks away, close quotes, what can Europe do? The war is not ending. I think what is happening with tariffs, with Ukraine, with the Middle East, with everything that Donald Trump touches, is that reality is not as simple as he may imagine it is. I want to make super clear, though, I don't want to be that person who is sitting there going, Trump is terrible, Trump is terrible, Trump is terrible,
moron.
because that isn't useful. America has voted for him, and there is much in what he says around tariff rules, and particularly around China, which is absolutely essential for us to consider. The problem is you cannot do everything, everywhere, all at once. And that is what the markets are responding to. When you've got this hose turned on to full, blasting in your face, you don't have any time to think.
No,
or
breathe.
And the markets are saying, give us time to digest stage by stage what it is you're trying to get to. And maybe we can think, right, how do we price things? What business strategies should we have? But as I say, if in the morning what was true yesterday is no longer true, no business can prepare for that. And that's what creates the problems with the economy and the problems with consumer confidence.
To channel my inner Martina Navratilova, who made the point on the podcast yesterday, I don't agree with him on anything apart from the fact that men are men and women are women and trans women aren't women, now supported in the UK by the Supreme Court ruling. I agree with him on that, obviously. I don't mind some of the China rhetoric, because I do think it's woken up the rest of the world to this idea of an over-reliance on products controlled by Beijing, which in turn is controlled by a communist party. I've just written this story, which is going to go on the website later, with Ian Duncan Smith having written to Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, pointing out how much of a control a Chinese company called, well, it's based in Hong Kong, but Sir Ian's point is, if you're based in Hong Kong these days, you're still controlled by Beijing. A company called CK Infrastructure Holdings has in the UK, right? So this company, over the course of the last 15 years, has bought up huge amounts of our national critical infrastructure, owns 40% of UK power networks, is currently bidding for Thames Water, is currently bidding for a stake in that Vodafone 3 merger, already owns wind farms across the country, solar farms, parts of the national grid in Northern Ireland, parts of the national grid in Wales. It's literally mind-blowing how much of a stake Chinese investment now has in the UK. And he's making the point, just to use the quote, if you allow this company to have control over Thames Water, then, quotes, it will be responsible both for keeping the lights on and the water running in the capital. Now that, combined with quite legitimate concerns about slave labour being used to make electric vehicles, solar panels and wind farms that Ed Miliband, as Energy Security and Climate Change Secretary, wants to introduce more of in the UK. I mean, I'm quite glad that somebody has finally blown the whistle on some of this stuff.
And if you think of Chinese investment in our nuclear
Yeah.
industries, and of course in steel, which we have discussed on this podcast many times, and Ed Miliband is now signalling that he will have to move on this slave labor issue and ban some of these companies that are producing solar panels, which the UK is using to reach these net zero targets. But the problem is we are so reliant on China that if we ban Chinese products, there is no way we will have the solar farms that Ed Miliband imagines will be sort of marching the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. We have become too reliant on one market to provide things to us. I was speaking to a very senior former civil servant, permanent secretary at this breakfast this morning. And he said to me, what needs to happen and what Rachel Reeves needs to do at the IMF is connect with countries like Korea, Japan, maybe Vietnam. We're going to have a discussion about the European Union. And people know who listen to us two talking, we are both very much against any idea of us rejoining the European Union, but it is a market that produces things. How do we create a relationship with the EU, which is nothing to do with reopening the Brexit discussions, but is to do with, for example, when we were discussing Scunthorpe, and I said Netherlands is one of the biggest producers of steel in Europe. Is there some way that we can link a positive network with the Netherlands on steel production, which could support Scunthorpe? We're going to have to do those things. And this person was saying to me, a sort of coalition of the willing of modern democratic countries, Canada in there, Australia. Reeves needs to be on that because at the moment, America is leaning isolationist and she has to have the strategic vision to think about bringing together other allies which decrease our dependency on China. The problem we have, though, Camilla, is our skis are going in different directions. We haven't been quick enough to see the problems of China. We've become too reliant on them.
We've created some of the problems of China.
And now we're pulling out too quickly before we have new supply chains which we can use to our advantage.